I was going to start off trying to kind of do this icebreaker thing and make you guys laugh a little bit, but I was so moved by Chaz that I really want you to remember what he said, and then think about him in the context of what I'm going to present today. And Charlie, if that was purposeful, I think it was brilliant that you put Chaz and I close together. And I don't want to steal any of his thunder. What he's doing is amazing, but he's exactly the type of person that Michigan needs in order to build enterprising communities. So think about that as we go forward. I'm going to start with a couple of things. I love quotes. So, and why do I love quotes? Because there are a lot of people who are a lot smarter than me, with a lot more experience, and they can say things better than me. So I'll use some quotes in my talk today, and I think you'll enjoy them. The second thing is I love nature. In particular, I love weather. So I'll use some weather analogies. Again, I hope you love weather as much as I do. The other thing that I wanted to clarify first is the difference between an enterprising person and an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is a subset of enterprising people. I think Chaz is a really great example of an enterprising person. And there are a lot of other people who are enterprising people who come up with new adventure races and new research and all of those different types of things. And what we have to do in Michigan is really create the environment and the culture where those people can thrive. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a story of an acquaintance that I met in San Antonio, Texas about 10 years ago. His name is Mike. He's a PhD, MD PhD from the University of Michigan, and his goal in life was to establish a medical research, medical device company. This was in the late 1990s, and he had started his company here in Michigan, and he had really run into a lot of struggles. And he had some friends down in Austin, Texas, who said, why don't you come on down to Austin? There's a lot of stuff going on here. You can try to start your company here. If you don't have any luck, there's lots of jobs. We're sure you'll find something. So he went down to Austin, Texas, and a long story short, 2 years later, had a $25 million medical device company. And so I'm at this conference in San Antonio, and I asked him, I said, so what was different? You know, I was working for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation at the time, so I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder about, oh, Texas is so great. And he said, I can't tell you the difference on the ground, the difference between Michigan and Texas on the ground. You still have to make good pitches to get venture capital. You still have to work hard to get the best people to come work for you. Those typical struggles that entrepreneurs and new companies go through. He said, but I can tell you the difference in how I felt about being an entrepreneur. He says in Texas, when you're an entrepreneur, you're a hero. People love you. They don't give you things for free, but they support you, and it's a positive environment. And again, this was 10 years ago, but at the time he said in Michigan, when you're an entrepreneur, you're a criminal. You must not be able to hold down a job. Why don't you work at the big three? You have an MD, PhD. What are you doing starting a company? Now, these are his words. And these are the words of a person who tried to be an entrepreneur in our state and struggled. Now, I'm not trying to be overly negative here, but I do want to identify the problem and talk about how to fix it. Now, I've started 6 enterprises in this state, and I've had pretty good success doing that. And so I don't necessarily share his opinion about the state, but I do think there's some things that we need to work on to make ourselves better. And so as I talked to Mike and I said, well, what is the pain point here? What is the pain point that Michigan has to deal with? And again, in kind of my way of stealing other people's thinking, I went to John Maynard Keynes and got this quote: most men love money and security more and creation and construction less as they get older. And I think this encapsulates the issue with our state right now. Now, you can take the people part of that out. Let's take men out and put in institutions or put in corporations. And this is not intended to bash them. It's intended to really paint the picture and talk about the void that exists in our state. So we have a lot of long-standing companies and long-standing institutions, and the people who are hired to run those should make sure that they're sustainable and maintained over a long period of time. But the piece that we're missing is this enterprising piece. Now, sure, there are some really good enterprisers in this state, but as a per capita percentage of the total population, we do not match up very well. We have taught our young people how to get jobs, how to be employees rather than be employers. And we've done that for a very long time. So what do we do about that? Well, now that we understand what the issue is, what do we do about that? Well, what you want to do, what I like to think about, is generate economic hurricanes. A Chaz is an economic hurricane, right? And there are a lot of people in this room who are economic hurricanes. People who don't ask permission, people that just go and implement their ideas and do the things that they need to do. So that's what you want to create, lots of these economic hurricanes. Again, the current situation, and this is Hurricane Bill from last summer of 2009, and Hurricane Bill was a Category 4 hurricane. And it was a really amazing hurricane. But there was this strong trough that was kind of coming across, a strong low pressure system that was coming across the US at the time. And no matter how strong the hurricane, some of these hurricanes have the power of 10,000 atomic bombs. A very simple, strong trough can steer that hurricane off so that it misses its mark. Tear the top right off the darn thing. And I believe that is the current state of our communities in Michigan. And there are two components to this trough. There's a negative component and a positive component. The negative component is this idea of entitlement. This idea of that we have these well-entrenched leaders in our communities and well-entrenched ways of doing things in our communities. And so when you throw an enterpriser in that mix, and that's why I'm so amazed by Chaz, is that guy just did it, right? In the face of all of this resistance, he just did it. So that negative force, well, we don't want you to be a leader. And I'm sure that Chaz has probably run into it. That's why I was hoping he would stay and I could ask him that. Then there's a positive component to this trough, and that is a lot of well-meaning people who create government programs and create all kinds of other assets, but they come with strings attached, lots and lots of strings attached. They become real distractions to an enterpriser's ability to be successful. So as you think about yourselves as leaders, as you think about yourselves as leaders in your communities, ask yourself whether you are being part of that trough or whether you are empowering this type of thing, where you have hurricane after hurricane after hurricane just lining up in your community. And this is the environment that you want to have. Back in the 1950s and 60s in Silicon Valley, this is what was happening. Just hurricane after hurricane after hurricane. So how do you create these hurricanes? Well, just like any natural hurricane, which requires the right water temperature, the right winds aloft, the right air pressure, you need certain ingredients to build economic hurricanes as well. And the first is people. Now, we've been bludgeoned to death with this idea of creative class, right? And I don't disagree with the fact that you have to have creative people in order to be an enterprising community. You absolutely do. That is ingredient number one. But if you don't have the next two ingredients, you don't have an enterprising community. And the first is the ability, people who are willing to take risk. Now, Chaz certainly has been willing to do that. Sounds like he took a pay cut to go into this line of business. So he took a risk to be an enterprising person. And you cannot be enterprising without taking risk. And the third piece, or the second piece, is this idea of adaptability. I tried to work in big corporate environments and I've failed miserably. I've been far more successful in my enterprising endeavors than I could have ever been working in big corporate or big government environments. Because I just don't like to do things the same way. I like to find new ways of doing things. Now, Bill Gates gets this better than anyone I've ever heard. And a couple of quotes here. As we look ahead into the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. Now, Chaz is a guy that empowers other people, right? Through his programs and through the work that he does. And the other thing that Bill gets, he says, and Bill, like we're friends, at Microsoft, Bill, if you're out there, when you see this, at Microsoft there are a lot of brilliant ideas, but the image is that they all come from the top. I'm afraid that's not quite right. Michigan is a state that's built on command and control structures. A few people at the top get to have all the ideas, and everybody at the bottom has to implement those ideas like a good doobie. Well, I'm afraid to tell you that if you want enterprising communities, you cannot operate that way. You have to create an environment that empowers people and gives them the tools to be successful. What is the second ingredient? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but I hope this guy really gets it. And I think he does. President Obama. His quote is, "Money is not the only answer, but it makes a difference." Now, I've heard him talk about some of his commerce and economy ideas, and I think the thing that he understands that we all need to understand is this concept that we have the economic assets to generate economic hurricanes. The state of Michigan has stronger and more economic assets than most countries in this world. Now, the problem with our economic assets is they're hidden behind walls. They're hidden in these big institutions and in these big corporations. So enterprisers who aren't part of that ecosystem don't get access to them. The problem isn't that we don't have, to answer the problem here is we have to redeploy the assets that we have so that they're open for enterprisers to have access to them. The third ingredient is culture, and these next two ingredients are really the important ingredients. And I like Thomas Edison's quote here. He says, "Hell, there are no rules here. We're trying to accomplish something." Now, how many of us work in corporate R&D? Okay, there's a few hands that you know that's not how it works, right? There are rules up the wazoo. Chaz doesn't follow rules, right? I'm really glad that Chaz talked before me, because that guy doesn't follow rules. He sets the rules. He goes out and does what he thinks he needs to do to make his community a better place. That's an enterprising attitude. That's an enterprising culture. And the other piece that I think is really, really important, and the part that really troubles me about our state and our communities, is our hatred of failure. Ask yourself, when was the last time you rewarded someone for taking a risk but failing? We don't do that well. And that's not unique to Michigan. We're talking about Michigan today, so that's what I'm focused on. But if you want to have an enterprising place, failure needs to be celebrated. There's a little town in Iowa, and it's probably 1,200 people. This little town in Iowa, whenever there's a business that closes, they have a kind of a big funeral pyre, and they burn a bunch of stuff from the business, and then the next morning, people line up to invest in that person's new idea. As long as they're not complete idiots, the community will reinvest. So there's some strings that work. And that's a really important part. My son, a few years ago, was in first grade, and this is the idea about culture and relates to education. He was in first grade several years ago, and we got called into this conference by his teacher. And his teacher said, "Well, we got some serious problems here." And I said, "Well, I saw his report card. I didn't see any serious problems." "Well, his handwriting is substandard, and he refuses to color in the lines." Okay, I'm out of here. Right? I almost lost my mind. I said, I calmly, my wife, who was an angel, kind of grabbed me by the knee under the table and said, don't. And I said, Mrs. So-and-so, to protect her reputation, I don't care if my son ever has good penmanship, and I don't care if my son ever colors in the lines. Now, you can give him an F every marking period, he'll be going to second grade. And so this idea of culture change, I love the governor. I don't want to beat up on anybody here. I'm not trying to do that. But if we're going to change the state and build on this void that we have, culture change has got to be part of that. Now, I'm probably running out of time, but I want to add this last slide, because people always ask me, so you failed miserably in the corporate world, which I did. You've been successful as an enterpriser. What is the big thing? What is the one thing, Matt, that really makes the difference? And that one thing, it all starts with attitude. It all starts with the willingness to take risk. It all starts with the willingness to come back to your hometown and to take a pay cut and get out there and start painting murals with youth, right? That's the right attitude. And so I think, and look at this guy. Wow, I want to look like that when I'm that age, right? This guy has lived life. I won't have that much hair, but I want to look like that. So, and the quote I think is really important to me, and I was a little ticked off at Aaron at his presentation earlier because he stole my quote. Two roads diverged in the woods. I took the one less traveled. That has made all the difference. So if you think about yourself as an enterpriser, if you think more importantly about your position as a leader in your community, ask yourself, are you and is your community willing to take the road less traveled? Thank you.